Good morning. This is the second part of your reading for today. We're going to be looking at reading from chapter 13 in your Princess and the Goblin book. So we had a little short chapter about Curdie. Let's hear now a story about the Cobb's creatures. We've heard kind of reference to these creatures before. The Cobbs is another name for the Goblin. So we'll see that in today's chapter. Chapter 13. Now, about this time, the gentlemen whom the king had left behind him to watch over the princess had each occasion to doubt the testimony of his own eyes. For more than strange were the objects to which they would bear witness. They were of one sort, creatures, but so grotesque and misshapen as to be more like a child's drawing upon his slate than anything natural. They saw them only at night, while on guard about the house. The testimony of the man who first reported having seen one of them was that, as he was walking slowly round the house, while yet in the shadow, he caught sight of a creature standing on its hind legs in the moonlight, with its 4 feet upon a window ledge, staring in at the window. Its body might have been that of a dog or a wolf, he thought, but he declared on his honor that its head was twice the size that it ought to have been for the size of its body, and as round as a ball, while the face, which it turned upon him as it fled, was more like one carved by a boy, upon the turn-up inside which he is going to put a candle, so like a jack-o'-lantern kind of, than anything else he could think of. It rushed into the garden. He sent an arrow after it, and thought he must have struck it, for it gave an unearthly howl, and he could not find his arrow any more than the beast, although he searched all about the place where it vanished. They laughed at him until he was driven to hold his tongue and said he must have taken too long to pull at the ale jug. Too long a pull at the ale jug. But before 2 nights were over, he had one to side with him. So there's one gentleman at arms who saw this, now another person. For he too had seen something strange, only quite different from that reported by the other. The description the second man gave of the creature he had seen was yet more grotesque and unlikely. They were both laughed at by the rest, but night after night another came over to their side, until at last there was only one left to laugh at, all his companions. 2 nights more passed, and he saw nothing, but on the third he came rushing from the garden to the other 2 before the house, in such an agitation that they declared, for it was their turn now, that the band of his helmet was cracking under his chin with the rising of his hair inside it. It's pulling so hard, so high, because his hair is growing stiff. So they're all terrified of these creatures. Running with him into that part of the garden, which I have already described, they saw a score of creatures, to not one of which they could give a name, and not one of which was like another. Hideous and ludicrous at once, gamboling on the lawn in the moonlight. The supernatural, or rather subnatural, ugliness of their faces, the length of legs and necks in some, the apparent absence of both or either in others, made the spectators, although in one consent as to what they saw, yet doubtful, as I have said, of the evidence of their own eyes and ears as well. For the noises they made, although not loud, were as uncouth and varied as their forms, and could be described neither as grunts nor squeaks, nor roars nor howls, nor barks, nor yells, nor screams, nor croaks, nor hisses, nor mews, nor shrieks, any of the normal animal sounds, but only as something like all of them mingled into one horrible dissonance. It's a terrible sound that does not go together. Now, keeping in the shade, the watchers had a few moments to recover themselves before the hideous assembly suspected their presence. But all at once, as if by common consent, they scampered off in the direction of a great rock, and vanished before the men had come to themselves sufficiently to think of following them. My readers will suspect what these were, but I will now give them full information concerning them. They were, of course, household animals belonging to the goblins. So it's kind of like the goblins' pets. whose ancestors had taken their ancestors many centuries before from the upper regions of light into the lower regions of darkness. So they used to be normal animals, but they've been brought down, and just like the goblins, become uglier and less human over time. The original stocks of these horrible creatures were very much the same as the animals now seen about farms and homes in the country, with the exception of a few of them, which had been wild creatures, such as foxes and indeed wolves and small bears, which the goblins, from their proclivity toward the animal creation, had caught when cubs and tamed. But in the course of time, all had undergone even greater changes than had passed upon their owners. They had altered, that is, their descendants had altered, into such creatures as I have not attempted to describe except in the vaguest manner, the various parts of their bodies assuming, in an apparently arbitrary and self-willed manner, the most abnormal developments. Indeed, so little did any distinct type predominate in some of the bewildering results that you could only have guessed at any known animal as the original. And even then, what likeness remained would be more one of general expression than of definable conformation. So basically, these animals have just become more and more grotesque and ugly and less like their original animals. Just like the goblins started off as humans, but they, because of being evil in their heart, have really started to change and don't even look human anymore. But what increased the gruesomeness tenfold was that from constant domestic, or indeed rather family association with the goblins, their countenances had grown in grotesque resemblance to the human. No one understands animals who does not see that every one of them, even amongst the fishes, it may be with dimness and vagueness infinitely remote, yet shadows the human. In the case of these, the human resemblance had greatly increased, while their owners had sunk towards them. They had risen towards their owner. So they have become more and more like goblins over time, and the goblins have become more and more like animals. But the conditions of subterranean life began equally unnatural for both. While the goblins were worse, the creatures had not improved by the approximation, and its result would have appeared far more ludicrous than consoling to the warmest lover of animal nature. I shall now explain how it was that just then these animals began to show themselves about the king's country house. The goblins, as Curdy had discovered, were mining on, at work both day and night, in divisions, urging the scheme after which he lay in wait. In the course of their tunneling, they had broken into the channel of a small stream, but the break being in the top of it, no water had escaped to interfere with their work. Some of the creatures, hovering as they often did about their masters, had found the hole and had, with the curiosity which had grown to a passion from the restraints of their unnatural circumstances, proceeded to explore the channel. The stream was the same which ran out by the seat on which Irene and her king papa had sat, as I have told. So this stream that the goblin creatures are following ends up in the garden of this country house. Now, and the goblin creatures found it jolly fun to get out for a romp on a smooth lawn such as they had never seen in all their poor, miserable lives. But although they had partaken enough of the nature of their owners to delight in annoying and alarming any of the people whom they met on the mountain, they were, of course, incapable of designs of their own, or of intentionally furthering those of their masters. So they're still not as intelligent of creatures as the goblins. For several nights after, the men-at-arms were at length of one mind as to the fact of the visits of some horrible creatures, whether bodily or spectral, meaning maybe it's like a ghost or a spirit, not actually real. They could not yet say. They watched with special attention that part of the garden where they had last seen them. Perhaps, indeed, they gave in consequence too little attention to the house. But the creatures were too cunning to be easily caught, nor were the watchers quick-eyed enough to descry the head, or the keen eyes in it, which from the opening whence the stream issued would watch them in turn, ready, the moment they should leave the lawn, to report the place clear. So, those are the goblin creatures. I thought that Irene would show up in this chapter since it was about the men-at-arms, but I had forgotten that she doesn't. So the goblin creatures are becoming less and less like real animals. And I do want you to have a good imagination as you're imagining what these animals look like, but there are a couple of pictures from the book that I'd like to show as well. So here's the men-at-arms looking out across the lawn at where the creatures are. And this is what some of the animals might have looked like. Animal-like in some ways, but grotesque, and probably your imaginations made them even worse looking. They're not like real animals, even though there are a few places where they do resemble an animal. Okay, well, that is the Cobb's creatures. We're going to take a break from Princess and the Goblin tomorrow and continue some mythology with the story of Aeneid, but we'll continue this next week, chapter 14, a chapter called That Night Week. I'll talk to you all later. Bye.